Do you ever get a warning from a stranger that shakes your entire world while you are standing in a crowded airport? I did. Your husband isn't flying to Singapore. Those were the words from a flight attendant. I almost ignored it. But 1 hour later, a misdirected work email confirmed my worst fears. And that's when the wife died, and the forensic auditor was reborn. My name is Eliza Vance. At 38, I was a woman who understood spreadsheets better than people. As a former forensic auditor, my life was built on verifiable data and logical conclusions, which is why I was at Denver International Airport, checked in for a 3-day digital detox at a mind-numbingly expensive spa in Arizona. My life was good. It was stable. It was verifiable. My husband, Julian Thorne, had kissed me goodbye before dawn. He was 42, the charismatic CEO of Apex Vanguard Capital, and he was, at that very moment, supposedly sealed in a metal tube halfway over the Pacific. He had an 18-hour flight to Singapore to close what he called a legacy deal, something involving $1 billion and a lot of backslapping I rarely understood. I was standing in the TSA pre-check line, mentally cataloging the contents of my carry-on, when a woman in a crisp airline uniform stepped in front of me. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that sinks deep into the bones, but her eyes were sharp. "Mrs. Vance." I looked up, startled. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" She glanced at the shuffling line and lowered her voice, gesturing me toward the small, dead space by the stanchions. "My name is Maya. I'm a flight attendant. I recognize you from your husband's concierge key profile picture." A prickle of annoyance. Julian loved those elite statuses, loved plastering our faces on them as proof of our perfect life. "Is there a problem?" "I know this is incredibly strange," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I worked the first flight out to Jackson Hole, Wyoming this morning. Your husband was on that flight." The words hung in the sterile, recycled air. I felt a small, polite smile fix itself on my face, the kind of smile I used in depositions. "I think you must be mistaken. My husband is on his way to Singapore. It's an 18-hour flight. He left this morning." I even pulled out my phone. A reflex. I showed her the last text from Julian, sent at 6:03 a.m. "Boarding now. Love you." Maya didn't even glance at the screen. She just shook her head, a small, sad gesture. No, he wasn't just on the flight. He was with Cassandra Reed, his COO. They were in seats 1A and 1B. I served them champagne. I am absolutely certain. Cassandra Reed. Of course. The woman who worked as hard as Julian, laughed at all his jokes, and was 10 years younger than me. A cold, sharp sensation, like a needle of ice, slid directly into my sternum. But auditors do not panic. We analyze. "That must be a coincidence," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "A look-alike. My husband is on a plane to Asia." Maya looked at me, her professional mask slipping, revealing a flash of raw pity. "Ma'am," he called her Cass. "They were comfortable." She stepped back. "I'm sorry. I would want to know." She melted back into the crowd, leaving me standing by a gray pillar. I watched her go, then mechanically picked up my bag, showed my ID, and stepped into the X-ray scanner. I raised my arms, feeling the hum of the machine, and tried to reboot my brain. It was a mistake, a simple, human error. Maya was tired. She saw 2 dark-haired executives in first class and made an assumption. I made my way to the first-class lounge, the automatic glass doors whispering open. The quiet inside was a balm, but my heart was hammering against my ribs in a way that felt entirely unreasonable. I ordered a glass of champagne, even though it was barely 10 a.m. My spa weekend was starting early. I told myself. I sat in a plush armchair, ignoring the panoramic view of the Rockies. My hand was shaking. Just check. Verify the data. I pulled out my phone and opened the Find My app, a pastel icon of betrayal I had never once felt the need to use. I typed in Julian's name. The pin loaded. My breath hitched. Then, it flooded back in a rush of relief that left me dizzy. His phone was pinging from San Francisco International Airport. SFO. Of course. A layover. A perfectly logical, verifiable stop on any itinerary from Denver to Singapore. He must have flown there first. That's all it was. Maya was wrong. The stranger in the airport was wrong. My world was not shaking. I took a long, deep drink of the champagne. It tasted like ash. But the data was clear. Julian was in San Francisco, just where a man flying to Singapore ought to be. I was being paranoid. Everything was fine. Exactly 1 hour passed. 60 minutes of me trying to force-feed myself the SFO lie. I was on my second glass of champagne, the bubbles feeling like grit in my throat, when my phone vibrated on the polished granite table. It was an email from Julian. My first thought, a stupid, hopeful flicker, was that he'd landed in San Francisco and was checking in. Then I saw the recipients. It was not just to me. It was a reply all to a thread. And in the CC line, I saw my personal address, E. Vance Eggmail, com. Right next to it was the intended recipient, the one his finger must have missed by a fraction of an inch in the autofill. C. Read A. Apex Vanguard, com. A simple typo, a fatal one. The subject line hit me first. Re-finalizing Phase 2, liquidation, Wyoming Trust. My blood didn't just run cold. It froze solid. I read the body. Cassandra. The Singapore cover worked perfectly. Eliza's en route to the spa. We're clear to finalize the last asset transfer from the trust tonight. Make sure the lawyers in Jackson Hole are ready. The glass slipped from my fingers. It didn't shatter, just hit the plush carpet with a dull, muffled thud, spilling champagne over my shoe. I stared at the screen. The lounge music, the quiet chatter, the distant call for boarding, it all dissolved into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. Wyoming. Jackson Hole. Maya had been right. The tired-eyed flight attendant had not been mistaken. She had been a prophet, but the real horror, the part that made my auditor's brain seize in pure, cold terror, was not the lie. It was not the affair with Cassandra, which was suddenly, sickeningly obvious. It was 2 words. Wyoming Trust. I knew what that meant. In my old life, Wyoming Trust was a bogeyman. It was the Switzerland of America. It was the black hole of financial law, a place where fortunes went to disappear, protected by the most impenetrable corporate privacy statutes in the country. You didn't use a Wyoming Trust to optimize taxes. You used it to hide, to launder, to erase. You used it to make assets and people vanish. My spa weekend was over. My marriage was over. My life as I knew it was a fabrication. I stood up, leaving my bag, my coat, and the spilled drink. I walked straight to the lounge reception desk. The woman looked up, startled by my expression. I have a family emergency, I said, my voice a flat, dead thing. I need to cancel my flight, immediately. I didn't wait for her reply. I walked out of the lounge, through the terminal, against the flow of travelers. I was a ghost moving in reverse. I didn't stop until I was in the concrete chill of the parking garage, punching the button for my car. The drive back to Cherry Creek was a blur of automatic reflexes. Brake, gas, signal. But my mind was working. I pulled out my phone, using the hands-free. I called the airline, Julian's airline. Concierge key desk, this is... A cheerful voice began. This is Eliza Vance, I cut in, using the voice I reserved for hostile witnesses. I am the wife of Julian Thorne. Account number. I rattled off the numbers from memory. I need to confirm his itinerary. There appears to be a security discrepancy. The word security worked magic. The agent's tone snapped to attention. Of course, Mrs. Vance. I have his account right here. I see he's on his way to Singapore. That's what I want you to verify, I said. Check the ticketing record, not the reservation. The actual, ticketed flight number he boarded this morning. Silence. I could hear clicking, Then, a hesitant, Mrs. Vance? I'm not seeing any Singapore booking for Mr. Thorne. Not for today. What do you see? I asked, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I see one flight booked, the agent said, his voice now cautious. A same-day round trip from Denver to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. He landed about an hour ago. He was still talking when I ended the call. That's when the final piece of data slammed into place. A memory from last month. Julian, at our kitchen island, sliding a thick stack of documents toward me. Eli, honey, just need your signature on these, he'd said, his hand already pointing to the signature tabs. What is it? I'd asked, trying to read the dense legal text. Just standard investment authorizations. It's for the Singapore deal. We need to move some assets around for tax optimization before the close. Tax optimization. I had signed, Eliza Vance, a woman who had built a career on sniffing out fraud, had signed away my life because my husband smiled and told me to. I had signed, and he had taken everything, hiding it behind the one firewall in the world I knew I couldn't breach, a Wyoming trust. I didn't cry. Tears are a chaotic variable, an emotional expenditure with no return on investment. The Eliza Vance who lived in this sprawling glass and steel house in Cherry Creek might have cried, but the auditor, the Eliza Vance who had clawed her way to the top of a brutal profession, she just got to work. The house was empty, silent save for the hum of the climate control. I walked directly to the home office, the room Julian had claimed, with its dark wood and oversized desk. I sat in his chair, the leather still molded to his shape, and powered up the central home server. It was time for the audit. Julian was smart, but he was also arrogant. His files were protected, but his methodology was lazy. His password for the server's administrative access was always a variation of his college basketball team. He was pathetically sentimental about his glory days. I typed in the first iteration that came to mind, Hoyas Champs 96. Access denied. I tried the second Apex Thorn 01. Access granted. He'd changed it. He was evolving. It didn't matter. The main drive looked clean. Too clean. Just household accounts, vendor lists for the landscaper, backups of our shared photos, a perfect curated digital life. But I wasn't looking at the surface. I was looking for the dark data, the files he thought were gone. I plugged in my personal drive and ran the data recovery suite I'd perfected during my old career, the one I'd used to reconstruct shredded ledgers and nail fraudulent CEOs to the wall. I pointed the software at the unallocated drive space, the digital trash he never thought to wipe. It took 12 minutes. A folder flickered into existence, a hidden encrypted volume named Project TAT. I didn't need to crack the encryption. Julian, in his infinite hubris, had stored the password in a deleted text file on the same drive. A rookie mistake. The folder opened. My breath did not hitch. My heart did not pound. I simply began to read. It was not a collection of sorted photos. It was scans. High-resolution PDFs of incorporation documents, notarized and stamped. The legal formation of the Thorne Anonymity Trust. The location, Cheyenne, Wyoming. I stared at the date on the bottom of the signatory page. 18 months ago. The world didn't tilt, but a cold, perfect clarity settled over me. 18 months ago. That was exactly 4 weeks after my startup. The company I had built from nothing had been acquired. It was 4 weeks after the buyout money, my money, had been deposited. I remembered the night. Julian had been so proud, so supportive. We should put it in the joint investment fund, Eli, he'd said, pouring champagne. Let me manage it. I'll make it grow for us, for our future. I had transferred it all. I opened a new window. I accessed our joint investment fund statements. On the other screen, I opened the Thorne Anonymity Trust Bank records, and I began to cross-reference. It was beautiful, in a sociopathic way. He hadn't just moved the money. He had washed it. He had systematically bled my capital, my $14 million from the joint fund. It was a complex series of dozens of transactions, funneled through 3 different shell LLCs before being deposited, clean and untraceable, into the Wyoming black hole, the Singapore trip. It wasn't just a lie to cover an affair. It was the final move. The billion-dollar deal was a fiction, a grand stage production designed to justify this exact week, to get me out of the way so he could make the last and largest transfer. I looked closer at the trust documents. Cassandra Reed's name was on them, not as a beneficiary, but as the managing signatory and the legal architect. She wasn't just his mistress. She was his partner in the crime. She had designed the legal cage, the impenetrable financial fortress where they were hiding my money. This was never just an affair. This was a long con. They were robbing me blind. They were liquidating my entire life's work, and they were planning to leave me with nothing but an empty house and a story about a failed Singapore deal. They were planning to run. The Wyoming Trust was just the beginning. It was the weapon, but it wasn't the entire war. Stealing my money was devastating, but my auditor's gut told me it was too simple for a man like Julian and a woman like Cassandra. This wasn't just a getaway fund. It was a war chest. I moved from the home server to the main event. Years ago, when Julian was just starting Apex Vanguard and I was still the supportive tech wife, I had helped him set up his server architecture. And I had, in a moment of professional foresight I'd long since forgotten, built myself a backdoor, a quiet, systems-level kernel exploit that was invisible to all but the most granular forensic scan. I had told myself it was just in case he ever had a catastrophic systems failure. That was a lie. It was in case of this. I keyed in the execution command. I wasn't just in his home office anymore. I was inside Apex Vanguard. I was God. They were sloppy. They assumed their network was secure. I bypassed the standard email servers. They were too smart for that and went straight for the cloud storage where their internal collaboration suite dumped its data. Specifically, the temp folder for saved Zoom recordings, a place no one ever thinks to clear. I found them, hours of them. Video calls labeled Project TAT Review and Phase 2 Strategy, all logged while Julian was supposedly in meetings and I was supposedly at yoga. I didn't watch them. I ran the audio through a transcription program, turning hours of video into searchable text. Then I searched for my own name. The first hit was Cassandra, her voice crisp and dismissive. Eliza's $14 million is the key. Once that final transfer is cleared, we have the leverage. Leverage for what running away to Jackson Hole was a small, tawdry prize. This was bigger. I kept reading. My anger, which had been a cold, solid thing, began to burn. The transcripts weren't about our marriage. They were about his company. This was not a plan to escape. This was a plan for a coup. The real conspiracy unfurled in a series of bullet points and financial projections. They weren't just stealing my money. They were using it to perform a hostile buyout of Apex Vanguard itself. My $14 million was the cash on hand. The Singapore deal wasn't just a cover for me. It was a cover for their partners, a justification for why Julian was moving so much capital. They had spent the last 6 months systematically fabricating losses for the current quarter. They were shorting their own assets, manipulating the books to create a false narrative of impending disaster. The company's stock value was, on paper, about to plummet. The plan was chillingly simple. They would call an emergency partners meeting. They would present the catastrophic, fabricated quarterly report. They would sow panic among the other founding partners, David and the older group, men in their 60s who were already looking toward retirement. Then, Julian and Cassandra would step in as saviors. They would offer to buy out the panicked partners at their newly deflated stock price, pennies on the dollar, using a private equity injection from an anonymous offshore investor. Me, I was the anonymous investor. They would own the entire firm, free and clear, and I would be left holding the bag. The final piece of their strategy was in a separate folder. one marked Personal JT. It was a draft, a legal document prepared by a cutthroat divorce attorney I'd never heard of. It was a draft of our divorce settlement. I read the filing justifications. He was planning to file first. He was painting me as the villain. It cited my increasing mental instability since leaving my job. It detailed my profligate and erratic spending, using the spa trip I was supposed to be on as Exhibit A. The joint fund, the one he had systematically emptied, would be presented as a victim of my risky and amateurish investment decisions, which had subsequently ruined the fund and jeopardized the firm's stability. He was going to blame the entire collapse on me. I would be left penniless, divorced, and professionally discredited, while he and Cassandra sat on top of his new empire, built with my bones. I finally understood. Julian hadn't just married a woman he loved. He had, 18 months ago, merged with an asset. He didn't look at me and see a wife. He looked at me and see an angel investor. And the moment I cashed out, the timer on our marriage began. I was a good auditor, but I was not a miracle worker. I had the what, but I needed leverage to make it stick. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. And I was, technically, still just a civilian. To fight this, I couldn't be Eliza Vance, the wife. I had to be Eliza Vance, the weapon, and a weapon needs allies. I knew exactly who to call. But I wouldn't call. This was not a phone call conversation. David Sterling, 63 years old, the senior founding partner of Apex Vanguard. David was old money, old school, and had built the firm on handshakes and integrity. He was the one who had brought Julian in, mentored him, and treated him like the son he never had. Julian was betraying him just as deeply as he was betraying me. I didn't bother to change out of the clothes I'd worn to the airport. I grabbed the encrypted hard drive, backed up all my findings, and walked out of my house, leaving the lights on. It was 2 a.m. when I pulled my car onto the dark, winding road up to Aspen. The 2-hour drive was a blur of high beams and cold fury. I did not feel tired. I felt energized, a humming, high-voltage current of purpose running through me. I didn't ring the bell at David's sprawling mountain estate. I called his private cell, a number only 2 or 3 people had. He answered on the first ring, his voice thick with sleep and alarm. "Who is this?" "David, it's Eliza Vance. I'm at your gate." 30 seconds later, the wrought iron gates swung open. He met me on the front step, wearing a silk robe, his hair wild. "Eliza, my God, what's happened? Is Julian?" "Julian is fine," I said, walking past him into the grand foyer. "He's in Jackson Hole with Cassandra Reed, celebrating the theft of my $14 million. And yours." That got his attention. I followed him into his study. He poured 2 glasses of brandy, but I waved mine away. "Eliza, that's a monstrous accusation," he said, but his eyes were sharp. "Yes, it is," I said. I pulled my laptop from my bag, plugged in the hard drive, and turned the screen toward him. "So let's review the data." For 20 minutes, I didn't speak. I just clicked. I showed him the Wyoming Trust. I showed him the faked quarterly loss projections. I played 30 seconds of the Zoom audio, the part where Julian and Cassandra laughed about how out of touch David had become. He was pale, silent. He was a man of the old guard, and he was trying to process a betrayal that was digital, abstract, and vicious. I can't believe he would—" "You don't have to," I said. "This is what you need to see." I opened the final file, a scanned wire transfer authorization for $2 million, moving from an Apex client fund into one of the Shell LLCs. "You'll recognize the signature, I assume." He leaned in. He stared at the looping, confident David Sterling on the digital line. "I never signed that." His voice was a whisper. Then he looked up at me, and the skepticism was gone, replaced by a cold, patrician rage. That arrogant little bastard, he forged my signature." He walked to his desk, sat down heavily, and then looked at me. I always had a feeling. Eliza. A gut instinct. He was too smooth, too eager to cut corners. He opened a drawer on his desk and pulled out a simple, unmarked USB drive. "What's that?" I asked. A thin, reptilian smile touched his lips. "Julian lost a major client's file last year. Blamed it on a server crash. It cost us a fortune. After that, I had our IT man install a little insurance on the main server. A keylogger. It records every keystroke, every password, every deleted file, and every email sent from the company server, whether they're on a VPN or not. It dumps to a secure file that only I can access." I stared at him. I had the transcripts and the bank records. He had the digital DNA of the crime itself. They didn't just have a keylogger. They had everything. "He's not just arrogant," David said, his voice hard. "He's a fool." I finally felt the first real flicker of victory. "Good," I said. "Then he'll be easy to catch." I pulled out my phone. It was almost 4:30 a.m. I had one more call to make. I dialed the number for Marcus Cole, the most ruthless financial fraud divorce attorney in Denver, the kind of lawyer you only call when you don't just want to win. You want to annihilate. I left a message with his 24-hour service. "This is Eliza Vance," I said. "I need to book Mr. Cole's first available slot today. Tell him it's a high-asset dissolution with evidence of criminal fraud. Tell him I am bringing the founding partner of Apex Vanguard Capital with me. We will be there at 7 a.m. Marcus Cole's office at 7 a.m. was not a place of comfort. It was a command center. The air was sharp with the smell of burned coffee and the quiet, high-frequency hum of expensive technology. Marcus was a shark in a $2,000 suit, and he had not flinched once as David and I laid out the digital entrails of Julian's betrayal. He just nodded, his eyes gleaming with a predatory focus. "Right," he said, cutting me off as I finished explaining the Wyoming trust. "This isn't a divorce, Mrs. Vance. This is a corporate decapitation. We don't negotiate. We detonate." He was already on his feet, pacing, firing orders at a paralegal who was typing at machine gun speed. "File the emergency injunction. Now. With the district court, I want a total asset freeze Julian Thorne, Cassandra Reed, all known aliases, all corporate entities, and specifically, the Thorne Anonymity Trust. Cite the evidence of criminal fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. I want them cut off from their own bank accounts before they finish their morning coffee." While Marcus's legal runners scrambled, David Sterling, now every inch the outraged founding partner, sat at the head of the long, polished table, his phone on speaker. "Helen, yes," he commanded, his voice dripping ice. "I am invoking Bylaw 4.2, the Moral Crisis Clause. I want an emergency virtual board meeting, immediately. Send the secure link to all partners except Thorne and Reed. They are the subject of the meeting. 30 minutes. Helen, I want everyone online." David muted the phone and looked at me. "Eliza, the data. We need it packaged. We need the weapon." This was my territory. I plugged my encrypted drive into the conference room's main screen. The keylogger data, combined with my own findings, painted a picture of such staggering arrogance it was almost beautiful. "He's been sloppy," I said, my voice flat, professional. He thought no one was watching. I brought up the logs. The keylogger caught Cassandra's password for a private realty portal. "They were shopping." "Shopping for what?" David asked. I typed. A new window opened, displaying a sleek, modern penthouse against the backdrop of the Teton Mountains. "He used $3 million from a company reserve account 2 months ago," I said. "He disguised it as a capital investment in a tech incubator. It wasn't. It was a down payment. He bought a penthouse in Jackson Hole." I clicked again. The deed appeared. "It's in Cassandra Reed's name." David's face turned a mottled, dangerous shade of red. "He used company money to buy his mistress a house." "He used our money," I corrected. "And it's all going in the report." For the next 50 minutes, I worked with a speed and focus I hadn't felt in years. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical rage. I took the mountain of digital evidence, the forged signatures, the faked losses, the Zoom transcripts, the penthouse purchase, and I forged it into a weapon. I created a perfect 50-page forensic audit report, complete with exhibits, detailing every single cent they had stolen and exactly how they had done it. At 8:01 a.m., Marcus Cole strode back into the room, a thin, terrifying smile on his face. He held his phone up like a trophy. "Gentlemen, Eliza," he said, "we have a bit of judicial luck. The case was assigned to Judge Amelia Royce." David looked blank, but I knew the name. Judge Royce. A legend. She didn't just interpret the law, she enforced it like a judgment. Judge Royce, Marcus continued, was famously, and very publicly, the victim of a near-identical marital financial fraud scheme about 20 years ago. Her ex-husband tried to hide everything in offshore accounts. She has, shall we say, a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of behavior. She also hates being lied to. He tapped his phone screen. The emergency injunction was argued, reviewed, and approved in under 1 hour. As of this moment, Julian Thorne and Cassandra Reed are cut off. Their personal accounts, their credit cards, the Wyoming Trust, the Apex accounts they had signatory power over. They are all frozen solid. A cold, beautiful silence settled in the room. The first strike was a success. Now, it was time to lure the king back to his collapsing castle. I picked up my own phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I navigated to my text chain with Julian, the one still filled with heart emojis and his oblivious, condescending love yous. It was time to set the trap. I typed, the words feeling alien and powerful. "Hey, honey, Arizona was amazing, but I missed you too much. Decided to come home early. My flight lands in a few hours. I'm going to make a special surprise for you tonight. Your favorite. Beef Wellington." I hit send. I needed him back in Denver. I needed him back in my house, the one I had paid for, the one he had tried to steal. I needed him to walk into the trap, fat and happy and arrogant, suspecting nothing. I returned to the house, but the silence felt different. It was no longer empty. It was a stage, and I was the set designer for the final act. There would be no Beef Wellington. The kitchen remained dark. My first stop was his office. I didn't just clear it. I erased him. Every framed photo of us, our wedding, our trip to Italy, the fake, smiling life I took from the shelves. I didn't break the glass. I simply stacked them in a recycling bin. Then, I went to his custom-built closet, his $200 ties, his Italian wool suits, his rows of polished shoes. I didn't donate them. I pulled 4 industrial-sized, heavy-duty black trash bags from the pantry and I filled them. I packed his entire, curated identity into the same bags I used for garbage. Then, I went to the living room. Our living room. The one with the 20-foot ceilings and the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room we used to entertain in. It was time to redecorate. I had spent an hour at a print shop on the way home. I started with the main wall, the one that held an oversized abstract painting Julian had bought for $50,000. I took the painting down. In its place, I began to hang my new art, using heavy-duty tape. They were the large-format printouts of the Wyoming Trust bank statements, page after page of his theft, arranged in chronological order, a wallpaper of his fraud. On the marble coffee table, where a stupid art book used to sit, I placed a single document, the bound, notarized, full-color copy of the deed to the Jackson Hole penthouse, the one in Cassandra Reed's name. The final touch was the 85-inch television screen above the fireplace. I plugged in the hard drive. I selected the Zoom recording, the one where they mocked me, where Julian laughed and called David a senile old fool, where Cassandra's voice dripped with contempt as she said, "Eliza is too naive. She'll be perfectly happy at her spa." I set the 30-second clip to loop. Endlessly. The audio filled the cavernous room. I went to the bar. Julian's prized possession was a bottle of 50-year-old single malt scotch. It was a trophy, a bottle he forbade me to even look at, let alone touch. I pulled it from the shelf. I unstopped the heavy crystal decanter and poured a very generous 3 fingers into one of his favorite glasses. I placed the glass on the coaster next to my chair. Then, I placed a second, identical, empty glass on the coaster opposite me. I sat down on the sofa, facing the door. I took a sip of the scotch. It was smoky, complex, and tasted like ash. I waited. The loop played. Eliza is too naive. My phone vibrated on the table. A new text. From Julian. Amazing plane just landed in Denver. Cass and I are heading straight to the house. There are some urgent work papers we need you to sign. I read the text twice. My hand did not shake. My heart did not pound. A strange, cold calm settled over me. He was bringing Cassandra. He was bringing his mistress, his partner in crime, to my home, to the home he had bought with my money and was now trying to steal from me. The arrogance, the sheer, unbounded, astronomical arrogance. He wasn't just coming home to a wife. He was coming home to his administrative assistant, a woman he expected to sign whatever he put in front of her, just as I had before. Or was it something else? A small, cold part of my brain analyzed this new data point. Was he suspicious? Was my beef Wellington text too much? Was he bringing his co-conspirator to control the situation, to have a witness, to double-team the emotional wife? It didn't matter. In fact, it was better. It was more efficient. It saved me the trouble of hunting her down later. I took another sip of the 50-year-old scotch. The trap was set, and the prey was bringing its own +1. The sound of the garage door whining open was my cue. I heard the muffled thud of car doors, the click of a key in the lock, and then the sound of their voices, light and casual, spilling into the foyer. "Eli," Julian called out, his voice full of that false, happy-to-be-home brightness. "We're back smells. Different. Where's that Wellington?" They walked into the living room and stopped dead. Julian and Cassandra, standing side by side, a matched set of bespoke treachery. They saw me, sitting on the sofa, legs crossed, holding the glass of 50-year-old scotch. Their eyes, in perfect unison, traveled from me to the walls. I watched Julian's gaze track the printouts of his own bank fraud. I saw his face tighten as he read the wire transfer numbers. I saw Cassandra's eyes flick to the coffee table, instantly recognizing the deed to her penthouse. Then, the audio from the television looped again. "Eliza is too naive. Eliza is too naive." Their own voices, laughing at me, echoing in the cathedral-like silence of the room. Julian's face, which had been pale with shock, contorted into a mask of theatrical rage. It was his CEO voice, the one he used to tear down subordinates. "Eliza, what the hell did you do?" he boomed, taking a step forward. "This is... You invaded my private files. You..." "Invaded." I cut him off. My voice was quiet, calm, and it sliced through his manufactured anger. "That's the word you're going with. Julian, not embezzled, not defrauded." Cassandra, to her credit, was colder. She was the strategist. She stepped in front of Julian, her eyes locking on mine. She was assessing me, not as a wife, but as an opponent. "Eliza, you are making a huge mistake," she said, her voice a low, steady threat. "You have stolen proprietary company documents. That is a federal crime." "Is it?" I asked, taking a small sip. I must have missed the part in the company handbook about it being a proprietary document when the CEO forges a partner's signature to buy his mistress a house. Julian's mask slipped. He saw the empty glass I had set out for him. He tried to switch tactics, to the caring, concerned husband. "Listen, Eli," he said, moving forward again, his hands held up in a gesture of peace. "It's not what you think. I know how this looks. But there is a reasonable explanation for all of this. I smiled. It was a real smile, but it had no warmth in it. It was the smile of an auditor who has just found the fatal error in the books. "Oh, I'm sure there is, Julian," I said. "I'm sure you have a fantastic explanation. But you know what I think I prefer the explanation in the 8K audit report that David just filed with the SEC?" The blood drained from Julian's face. He went from tan to a grayish, mottled white. He looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. You spoke to David," he whispered. He finally understood. He finally saw the trap. He looked at the walls, at the TV, at me. He was cornered, but the surprise didn't come from him. It came from Cassandra. She didn't panic. She didn't look shocked. While Julian was collapsing, Cassandra stood perfectly still. And then, very slowly, she smiled. "We knew you'd talk to David," she said, her voice almost conversational. "That's why we came back early." Julian turned to Cassandra, his face a mask of utter confusion. The script he had been running in his head had just been deleted. "Cassandra, what are you talking about? What do you mean? We knew." Cassandra didn't even look at him. She gave a small, sharp sigh of exasperation, as if annoyed she had to deal with him at all. "Shut up, Julian," she snapped, her voice like a razor. "You've done enough damage. You let her get into the server. You got sloppy." She turned her full attention back to me. The smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold, professional superiority. It was the look of a COO who had just outmaneuvered a competitor. "Did you really think you were that smart, Eliza?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "Did you think you were the only one in this room who knows how to read a balance sheet?" She reached into her sleek designer briefcase, the one Julian had bought her last Christmas, and pulled out a tablet. She tapped the screen, and it lit up her face, making her look like a predator in the dim light. "You remember those investment authorization papers you signed last month?" she asked. "The ones for the Singapore deal." A knot, not just in my stomach. It was in my throat, my chest. A cold, heavy knot of dread. I knew what she was going to say before she said it. The air in the room was suddenly too thin. "I remember," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You didn't read the fine print," Cassandra said, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "Julian is a sentimental fool. I'm not. I don't leave things to chance." She turned the tablet to face me. On the screen was a scanned document, a partnership agreement. "You see," Cassandra continued, "in that stack of papers, you didn't just authorize Julian to manage your funds. You signed a full partnership agreement. You, Eliza Vance, became a limited liability partner in a specially created SPV, Project TAT, the Thorn Anonymity Trust. It wasn't just his. It was ours." I stared at the screen, at the document, and at the bottom of the last page. There it was. My signature. "That fund," Cassandra said, her voice a victory lap, "is the legal entity that executed every single transaction in Wyoming, the entity that performed the fabricated losses, the entity that is, technically, performing a hostile takeover. As a full partner," she said, tapping the screen, "your signature is legally on every single one of those wire transfers. You've been co-signing the entire operation for weeks." I finally understood. I turned to look at Julian. He was staring at Cassandra, his face ashen, his mouth slightly open. He looked utterly terrified. He was just now realizing that he wasn't her partner. He was just the distraction. She was throwing him under the bus right alongside me. Cassandra's eyes bored into mine, full of a cold, final judgment. When the SEC investigates, and they will, thanks to David's little 8K filing, what do you think they'll see? She asked, her voice soft and poisonous. They'll see Julian, a lovesick, emotional fool who was influenced by his ambitious partner. But then they'll see you, Eliza Vance, the forensic auditor, the financial expert, the mastermind who designed the whole scheme. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. Your signature is on everything. Your fingerprints are all over the architecture of this fraud. You won't look like a victim. You'll look like the architect." She smiled, a true, genuine smile of pure, venomous victory. "You can't prove a thing, and I'm just the COO who got caught in the crossfire. But you're the one going down. Good luck in federal prison," Julian stammered, his eyes wide with a new, different kind of terror. "Cassandra, you..." "What?" I had been silent, watching her play her hand, and as the full, devastating weight of her checkmate settled in the room, I did something I hadn't done in what felt like a lifetime. I laughed. It wasn't a giggle. It was a full, genuine, deep laugh that startled all of us. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. Cassandra's triumphant expression faltered, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. I stood up, my legs feeling light. I walked back to the bar, picked up the bottle of 50-year-old scotch, and poured another inch into my glass. I swirled the amber liquid, savoring the moment. Cassandra. It was almost perfect, I said, turning back to her. Really, it's sophisticated, it's vicious. The partner liability trap. Brilliant. You almost had me. You really almost had me? Her brow furrowed. That cold superiority was cracking. Almost. Yes, I said. Almost. You made one mistake. One. Very, very basic mistake that a COO of your caliber should never have made. A rookie mistake. I took a slow sip. You trusted the data you were given. You relied on the digital scans that Julian, your incompetent but useful lover, provided. You, the legal architect, never once looked at the physical original documents. You never went to the law office to see the hard copies. Cassandra's face went rigid. Julian just looked confused. I walked over to the large abstract painting on the wall, the one I hadn't taken down. I pushed the right side, and a hidden panel clicked open. A wall safe. I entered the code my CPA license number, and the heavy door swung open. I reached inside and pulled out a single, slim, leather-bound folio. "This," I said, walking back to the coffee table, "is the original wet ink copy of the investment authorization I signed last month." I looked at Julian. I even smiled at him. A terrible, sweet, intimate smile. "Julian, honey, you, of all people, should have remembered my little quirk, my superstition." I looked at Cassandra. "I don't sign important documents. Not ever. Not in blue ink. Not in black ink. I use one pen." I held up the folio. "My special purple ink pen. The one my grandmother gave me when I passed the CPA exam on the first try. It's my good luck charm. I am, as Julian knows, pathologically superstitious about it." I opened the folio and fanned the pages out on the table, one by one. Page 1, standard authorization, signed in a bright, unmistakable purple. Page 2, authorization, purple. Page 3, purple. Then, I held up the last page, the page Cassandra had shown me on her tablet, the Special Purpose Vehicle Partnership Agreement. "But this one," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "this signature is in black ink." Cassandra stared at it, her face turning to stone. "It's a forgery," I said, my voice clear and bright in the suddenly silent room. "A clumsy one. At that. But you know what's even better. It's a clumsy digital forgery, too." I turned to Cassandra. "See, while you were enjoying champagne with him in Jackson Hole, my attorney, Marcus Cole, had a forensic signature expert analyze the digital copy that you just showed me, the one you have in your secure file. The expert is prepared to testify that my signature on that SPV document wasn't a fresh scan. It was a high-resolution electronic copy, lifted from a different document, and then digitally pasted onto the bottom of this one before it was printed." Julian was shaking his head, muttering, "No, no, no." Shh, Cassandra didn't move. She had finally realized she hadn't been the mastermind. She had just been the last person to get played. I reached into the folio one last time and pulled out the final set of papers. I threw them onto the coffee table, right on top of her penthouse deed. "This," I said, "is a copy of the criminal complaint for wire fraud, conspiracy, and felony forgery that Marcus filed this morning. And this is the notice that Judge Amelia Royce, the one who hates liars, has not only signed the asset freeze, she has signed the arrest warrants." I checked my watch. I looked up at the two of them, two statues in my living room, their empires crumbling in their heads. "You have 10 minutes, I said, picking up my drink. "You can decide if you want to drive yourselves to the downtown precinct to surrender, or if you'd rather wait for the U.S. Marshals to come here and do it for you." Thank you for listening to this story. Comment below where you are listening from. I'd love to chat and hear your thoughts. Please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.